Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Gun Rights Policy Conference. My name is Dave Kopp. I'm the president of the Arizona Citizens Defense League, or AZCDL. My topic today is state-level activism, or more specifically, how to win at getting things done at the legislature in your state. Job one, don't lose. It sounds obvious, and most of us are probably thinking, well, of course not. Why would you lose? But no matter how many good bills that you can get introduced, no matter how many good things you can get signed by the governor, you get one assault weapons ban that slips through and you lost. All of us are familiar with the litany of garbage that we get thrown at us every year. Assault weapons bans, red flag laws, enhanced or expanded background checks, etc., etc. You can't have those pass. It will ruin every good thing you did. So, job one, don't lose. Establish good relationships, especially with your legislators, but not only your legislators. Legislative staff is very important. Can't get in to see a legislator if the staffer at the front desk hates you. Security at the buildings. We all went through the lockdowns this past year. Can you get into the building? Maybe if you're friendly with the security, you can get past when others can't. Good relationships are always key. With your legislators, you need good sponsors. You need good, solid committee chairs that you can talk to and make sure you get your bills on the agenda. You need relationships with leadership so you can get those bills on the floor. Relationships are key to everything. You can't lobby without good relationships. Support structure. Most of us are type A personalities. Most of us are not real good at taking advice or instruction from others. It's important that you get help. It's important that you take it when you get it. Who do you surround yourself with? Do you have other state-level groups that work for the RKPA that you can depend on, that you can talk to, that you can exchange ideas with? Let's hope. But if not, start one. Just because you have already started a group doesn't mean you can't have more. Support structure is just so important. We need at all times to be helping each other out. Second Amendment Foundation gives us this platform so that we can talk to you about these things. That's our support structure today. We support Second Amendment Foundation. They support us. Just as an example, we have other state level groups. We have other national level groups that we can reach out to that can give us advice and opinions. Use every resource that you have. Your support structure is key to everything. Another important part of the legislative scene, make sure you know how to pick your battles. As a buddy of mine once said, know what hills you're willing to die on. Not everything is going to get through. That's just the reality of legislative sessions. You could maybe introduce 8, 10, 12 bills, and maybe only 2 or 3 of them get through. In the end, you have to be willing to accept that. All of us, again, type A personalities, these are our babies. We shepherded these things through. We work so hard for them. You want to see them all passed and signed. It's not going to happen. Sometimes maybe you get lucky. You do get them all done. But don't look for it. It's not going to happen most of the time. Be willing to take a loss here and there for a win in the long run. If you can get 2 or 3 of your most important bills out of a package of 10, you won. Follow through. One of the most important things, whether in legislation, in sports, whatever, follow through. Just because you got a bill passed and signed doesn't mean you take your marbles and go home. Goes back to those good relationships we were talking about. You need to go to that sponsor. You need to thank him for all his efforts. You need to make sure he's lined up to do it again for you next year with a different bill. You need to go to the folks, as we mentioned earlier, that you didn't get through. You didn't get all the way to the finish line. Hey, we worked hard for you. We'll work hard for you again. We'll try it again next time. You need to make sure that you talk to everybody that you were involved with, your support structure, your legislators, your staff. Thank everyone for their efforts. Make sure they understand that you're going to be back. Follow through. It's a process, not an event. You aren't one and done. You didn't come, win, leave. You'll be back next year. You'll be back a year after that. Make sure everybody understands that. Want to thank you for your time. Hope this was helpful. And I hope to see you all again, hopefully live, next year. Thanks again.
Hi, I'm Dean Rieck, Executive Director of Buckeye Firearms Association, and this is our report for the great state of Ohio. Let's dive right in. At the moment, there are 10 pro-gun bills and 9 anti-gun bills in the House and Senate, and more are on the way. Our top priorities this session include constitutional carry and limiting emergency power. Constitutional carry has been the brass ring for Ohio ever since passing concealed carry in 2004. 21 states have constitutional carry, including 2 of our neighboring states. This represents over 40% of the country. Now, every time we want to change the law, the gun grabbers panic. It happened with concealed carry, it happened with Castle Doctrine, it happened with removing the duty to retreat, and it's going to happen with constitutional carry. But even the gun grabbers have to admit that gun owners in Ohio have proven to be very law-abiding, and the Chicken Little arguments don't work as well these days. So we think our chances are good for constitutional carry. Limiting emergency power is a concept we started working on in 2020 after we saw the startling scope of government power in a declared emergency. So, along with our partners, the NRA and National Shooting Sports Foundation, we began furiously writing the most comprehensive emergency power legislation in the country. The 2 companion bills we crafted declare firearms possession, transportation, carrying, commerce, training, and range access, as well as hunting and fishing, to be life-sustaining essential activities. Both local and state government are prohibited from infringing these rights under the guise of a declared emergency. The legislation also provides legal recourse for people who experience unjust infringements of these essential rights. We lined up broad support with a total of 60 sponsors and co-sponsors in the House and Senate, and we introduced the bill with a live press conference. 2 other pro-gun bills of note, Second Amendment sanctuary and armed school staff. Interest in sanctuary legislation has exploded. Unfortunately, some sanctuary laws have a temperature problem. They either run too cold or they run too hot. In other words, some are little more than resolutions with no force of law, while others try to nullify federal law, which violates the Constitution's Supremacy Clause. BFA supports sanctuary laws that simply refuse to enforce federal law. Given the small number of federal agents, this can have the effect of nullification without directly challenging the separation of powers between states and the federal government. We devoted an entire Keep and Bear Radio podcast to this topic, so check it out. We are also working on legislation to fix a bad ruling by the Ohio Supreme Court on armed school personnel. Why the bad ruling? One word: Bloomberg. Bloomberg-funded lawyers helped bring a lawsuit against Madison local schools where they had armed staff members. The case took some twists and turns, but in a narrow 4-3 ruling, the Ohio Supreme Court determined that armed school staff must have more than 700 hours of police training. So now we'll need to pass a bill to clarify that Ohio law gives local school boards authority over their own security. There are other pro-gun bills, including removing the duty to inform, knife preemption, the Firearms Industry Non-Discrimination Act, and we support all of those. As for anti-gun legislation, Well, our governor is still pushing red flag, and the Democrats are making the usual noise. Extreme risk protection orders, universal background checks, locking up firearms, banning bump stocks, blah, blah, blah. Of the 9 anti-gun bills introduced, only one has even had a hearing. We don't expect any of these bills to go anywhere. In addition to legislation, BFA has also been working with a coalition of sportsmen's groups to help Ohio purchase 60,000 acres for conservation, hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation. We also successfully campaigned for millions of dollars to upgrade state shooting ranges. We're working with private nonprofit organizations to develop a gun-friendly suicide awareness and prevention program. Our Political Action Committee will soon be ramping up operations to grade and endorse pro-gun candidates for the upcoming elections. We just submitted a brief for the U.S. Supreme Court case New York State Rifle and Pistol Association Incorporated versus Corlett. And our foundation continues to operate the Faster Saves Lives program to give educators practical violence response training with more than 3,000 staff trained in 260 school districts across 18 states. And that just scratches the surface. So, yeah, we're busy. You can find out more by visiting our website at buckeyefirearms.org. Subscribe to our free newsletter for weekly updates. And listen to our weekly podcast, Keep and Bear Radio, available on Apple, Google, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other platforms. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And that's our report for the state of Ohio. I'm Dean Rieck. Thanks for watching. And from all of your friends here at Buckeye Firearms Association, we encourage you to keep up the good fight.
My name is Philip Van Cleave, and I'm the president of the Virginia Citizens Defense League. And I want to thank the Second Amendment Foundation and CCRKBA for the opportunity to again address everyone at the Gun Rights Policy Conference. Such an important thing for all of us to be a part of sharing this vast amount of knowledge between so many people. Well, here in Virginia, the Democrat leadership definitely wants to stop VCDL from having any more lobby day rallies like we did in 2020, where we had over 50,000 people. It was a huge event. This year in 2021, they had changed some laws where we couldn't have guns on the Capitol Square and in the state agency and government buildings. The city of Richmond, which is what surrounds the General Assembly, has an ordinance now they're allowed to do, which they couldn't before, where if there's an event that's permitted or should have a permit, however you determine that, that you can't have any guns there. So basically, their goal in all this is to make sure that we can't have what we've done in the past. They even banned guns in parks in Richmond, so we couldn't hold a rally in a park, say, or anywhere where we have to have a permit or should have a permit to have a rally. And this year, to get around that and to find a way to get our message into Richmond, we had what we referred to as a rolling lobby day, a rolling rally, where basically we had 1,000 cars come driving in from all the four corners of the state, merging in Richmond and going through in 4 waves, headed up each by a completely decked out bus. From top to bottom, a big 55 passenger bus. Rather expensive, but they were gorgeous, but each with a different message. A bright orange color our Gun Saves Lives color. And they all came, the buses came in with people, but the buses weren't really meant to bus a lot of people. They were really meant to lead all of the vehicles. So this was our way of getting our message into Richmond, and we did get a lot of coverage of that. Now, was it as effective as what we did the year before? No. But we couldn't do what we did the year before, which is have a big rally. In fact, they shut all that down because of COVID. So even if there was no gun ban in place in 2021, they pulled all the permits for having any kind of rally at the Capitol, because basically the Capitol was closed, all fenced off and everything. So the rolling rally was really the only good option that we had. And but even then, the police made it difficult in Richmond. They kept blocking off streets and rerouting everything. It was a mess, and they knew we were coming, so there was really no excuse for that. But that's what happened. How we're going to handle 2022, we're still looking at. We may take a slightly different tact. There are a few other options open, but again, every time they think of a way to shut us down, we just keep looking for a way around that to get the job done. And I believe this year, hopefully in 2022, we can do our regular lobbying. Even if you forget the rally, we need to have people go down and lobby. This is an election year, believe it or not. I think for virtually everybody else it's not, but for us it's a major election year in Virginia. We are going to be in November 2nd, we will be electing the entire House of Delegates, a new governor, a new lieutenant governor, and an attorney general as well. All those positions are up for grabs. We noticed that this year, not unexpectedly, the Democrats had to push for all this gun control in 2020 and toned it down considerably after that massive rally. Really toned it down this year. They did not want to remind gun owners of what they had done to us last year right before an election. So they toned it down. There's a special session going to start in a few days, and so far I haven't seen any gun control on it. I don't think they just are hoping we've got short memories and we'll forget. So, but they did solidify, all they did this year was solidify a few bans that were more or less in place and a couple minor things. They didn't do anything major. They didn't do any kind of assault weapon attempt or limitation on magazines or suppressors, none of that stuff. We've got a lot of work in front of us to undo the damage they've done in 2 years, but we've mitigated it by our being so active. So, as I mentioned, preemption was weakened in 2020, but due to the efforts of VCDL and gun owners in Virginia, out of 193 localities, only 12 have passed local gun control. The rest of them have stayed clear of it. Now, there's a couple more that are kind of looking at it, but even they are sort of slowed down at this point. One locality did make an exception. If you got a permit, a concealed handgun permit, then you were totally exempt. We got another locality that's thinking about doing this, looking at doing the same thing. But overall, it only represents 6% of the state have taken advantage of this ability for them to do local gun control. So I think that's an important thing that we've been blocking, and that'll be number one to get rid of in 2022 if we can turn the legislature around and maybe get a decent governor and attorney general, lieutenant governor. Lieutenant governor and governor would be important, as well as the General Assembly's House of Delegates. As I mentioned, the localities can ban guns in government buildings, recreation and community centers, parks, and events that are permitted or should have been permitted, and adjacent areas to those areas that were permitted or should have been permitted. We think this is a potential for another lawsuit. And by the way, we are suing the city of Winchester over these very same local ordinances, the ones especially that deal with parks, because there's no way to secure a park, and as well as these permitted or should have been permitted events. How does the person know that? How do they know if there's an event that should be permitted or whatever? Plus, they do adjacent streets. So what does that do to businessmen who you can't even get out? You couldn't even leave your business if you were armed during one of these events. So, we're suing over that, and the NRA is doing the similar thing with Fairfax County. But we will be expanding our lawsuits into other localities once we're through with Winchester. Certainly, Richmond is ripe for this. They put up signs around Capitol Square on the streets in that area, and it says no guns. And I kid you not, in very fine print at the bottom, it says, well, this sign only applies if there's a permitted or should have been a permitted event going on. So you've got to read all the way to the bottom, and you have to be a fortune teller to know if there's a permitted event or one that should have been permitted. That's even worse. 10 people get together and they're walking down the sidewalk, and the police could say, oh, well, that should have been a permitted event, that many people walking on the sidewalk. So that's unacceptable. And Richmond is playing a dirty game there of chilling rights because people see that sign, they're afraid to carry. They don't want to violate the law, even though they wouldn't be unless there was an event or a permitted event going on in that general area around the General Assembly and so forth, or anywhere that they're having a permitted event. But they put those signs up permanently in that area. Really, really, really despicable. So that's where we are. We've got a lot going on in Virginia. Like I say, elections are going to be critical. I think the nation will be watching what happens here. I know Virginians are fed up with all this gun control and everything else, all the other insanity that we're all seeing across the nation. And so we will keep the fight up, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. Wish I could see in person. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Welcome to the 2021 Gun Rights Policy Conference from sunny Florida. I'm Rich Nascak, founder and executive director of Florida Carry, the largest independent self-defense rights organization in the state. The very first time I spoke at GRPC was in 2012 in Orlando. Florida Carry was a fledgling organization, having only been chartered for a year. And I met Alan Gottlieb for the first time. And although he was cordial, Bowtie Guy commented that he'd seen state organizations come and go, and time would tell if Florida Carry had staying power. I'm honored to announce this year marks Florida Carry's 10th anniversary. Today I'm going to speak about state organizations in general, and specifically what's been going on in the gunshine state. No matter how much money a national level organization has, it can never muster enough resources to handle every state gun rights issue. State organizations like Florida Carry perform a vital role, as individual states are the daily crucible in which restrictions on rights are tested. It is here that we have traditionally seen the gun control lobby test their legal theories, including universal background checks, magazine limits, age limits on purchases, and a host of other restrictions. Until recently, those initiatives have been largely in response to specific shooting events. But the tone has now changed to reflect an alleged epidemic of gun violence. Primarily, state organizations fight on two fronts, in the legislature and in the courts. As important as it is to prefer new pro-gun legislation, state organizations must carefully scrutinize pro-gun bill language to ensure that no poison pills exist, and must lobby to have sponsors amend the bill to eliminate them if they're present. For example, a simple pro-gun rights bill filed this last session, HB 259 by Representative Cord Byrd, was intended to level the playing field among churches with regards to self-defense. Under Florida law, churches are considered private entities and as such decide for themselves if firearms will be allowed at services. Unfortunately, not all churches could do that. But the bill language had a poison pill. It's been long accepted in Florida that no firearm signs have no legal weight and do not suffice as legal notice for purposes of trespass of a building or conveyance. A verbal warning from the owner or authorized agent is needed, and unfortunately the bill language as originally filed contained a provision allowing churches to post a sign to prohibit firearms, violation of which was a crime. As written, a sign the size of a postage stamp would have sufficed. An unacceptable precedent giving signs the weight of law would have been set. Florida Carry brought that to light and the bill was amended to eliminate that poison pill. Governor DeSantis has signed the amended bill into law. Recently, the gun control lobby has been using a new tactic, mooting a case in progress to avoid an unfavorable judgment. In particular, this has become a pattern and practice utilized by local governments and some state agencies to shield themselves from liability incurred under Florida's preemption law. Senate Bill 1884 was introduced by Senator Ray Rodriguez, tweaking the statute to close that escape route. Quote, if after filing of a complaint, a defendant voluntarily changes the ordinance, regulation, measure, directive, rule, enactment, order, or policy, written or unwritten, promulgated or caused to be enforced in violation of this section, with or without court action, the plaintiff is considered a prevailing plaintiff. That's going to head off a lot of problems. That's the legislature wrap up. Let's take a look at what we've done in the courts. In March of this year, Florida Carry scored a big preemption win against liberal Broward County. This years-long case challenged several county ordinances regulating firearms. The county attempted to sidestep preemption in two ways. First, by using the term weapons instead of firearms. This is because state statute defines the two terms separately. The argument was discarded by the Florida 2nd District Court of Appeal, as the county's own definition of weapons included firearms. Secondly, the county relied on disclaimers such as, provided that a person is licensed to carry or is carrying in accordance with the law. In the words of Judge Spencer D. Levine, writing for the majority, the, quote, provided that clause, end quote, attempts to cancel out the apparent regulation of firearms in the ordinance. By including the provided that clause, Broward County attempts to regulate indirectly what it cannot do directly. The case affirmed the order of the trial court finding Broward County in violation of state preemption, and as Hannibal Smith famously said, I love it when a plan comes together. Here's another legal hot potato we've been working on in court. Being an ex-POC state, background checks for purchases are done by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or FDLE. Tens of thousands of purchases were indefinitely delayed without any action by FDLE. When counsel attempted to file on behalf of the folks whose rights were being denied, FDLE would immediately moot the case and destroy the investigatory record, claiming they had to in order to comply with Florida's anti-registry statute. Now, mind you, the records were those of the complainants themselves. Of course, this left the agency with immunity, and as a pattern and practice couldn't be established without the necessary record evidence. Well, the Florida 1st District Court of Appeal saw through it, ruled against FDLE, and stated record evidence necessary for such cases must be retained. That case is continuing. In a somewhat related case, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, the carry licensing issuer here in Florida, was told by the court that they must afford an applicant the ability to refute any denial of a carry license through a formal administrative hearing, something the department hasn't done in 14 years despite a statutory requirement to do so. So you can see our state organizations are the boots on the ground in both the legislature and the courts, but they need your support. When you stroke that check to support a national gun rights organization, please don't forget your state groups. I think Winston Churchill summed it up best, addressing President Roosevelt in 1941 regarding the Lend-Lease Act. Give us the tools, and we will finish the job. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alex Kincaid, Second Amendment attorney in Boise, Idaho, and I am happy to bring you this video today about sanctuary laws, what they do, what they don't do, how we can maybe create them where they will actually provide some protection to us, the law-abiding gun owners in the United States of America. I have worked very closely in Idaho over the last decade with the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance. And when we first started working together, Idaho was ranked 35 in the country for gun rights. We're now very proud to be #1. But it's a constant battle. We can't sit back and relax. We are constantly trying to sit down and figure out what are the most important issues this year to address. And of course, last year in 2021, the biggest issue was how are we going to protect ourselves against the Joe Biden administration? What are we going to do this legislative session to protect us from all these threats that are being made about registration or bans or taxing us on regular firearms, like we're taxing firearms that are subject to the National Firearms Act. How are we going to prevent this? How are we going to protect our way of life? Because we, the people in the state of Idaho, have a way of life that supports gun ownership. We support our right to self-defense. We don't rely on others to do it for us. And we don't want laws that are flying in the face of our values in this state. So we had to get kind of creative, because I'll tell you what, those sanctuary laws that most states are passing around the country, or they started passing last year, the same ones that are being passed by localities like cities and counties are becoming sanctuary locations. Those really aren't going to do anything. And it's sad to say, but it's true. If they do something, what they usually do is mislead people into violating federal law, and those people wind up getting prosecuted. So we passed that kind of a sanctuary law in Idaho 10 years ago. We needed something new. We needed something creative. We needed something that would actually help, because what we saw over the last decade was that the courts are not going to support the kind of sanctuary law that says, hey, federal government, here's my middle finger, go have some fun. We're not going to obey whatever you say. We're just going to defy you and not obey federal law. As soon as those cases go to court, now people are looking at, well, isn't there something called the Supremacy Clause? Isn't there something called the Commerce Clause? And yes, there is. Those are actually provisions in the law that say that you cannot just lift your middle finger to the federal government. So the Ninth Circuit, which is the jurisdiction where Idaho exists, said just that to someone who wanted to invoke one of these sanctuary laws. They're also called Firearm Freedom Acts. And that law came out of Montana. It's very similar to what we have in Idaho. And the Ninth Circuit said, yeah, we're not going to help you. That case was denied cert by the United States Supreme Court. They weren't interested in even reviewing it. So we had to get creative. We had to think a little harder here. How are we going to protect ourselves from infringements on our right to keep and bear arms? And what we came up with was, well, okay, let's start at the beginning, because Idaho has a constitution that protects the right to keep and bear arms. And that protection is separate and apart from the federal government's protection of this God-given right in the United States Constitution. Our Constitution, besides reciting that local governments can't infringe on this right, besides reciting that we actually have a right to keep and bear arms, says no law shall impose licensure, registration, or special taxation on the ownership or possession of firearms or ammunition, nor shall any law permit the confiscation of firearms except those actually used in the commission of a felony. Well, that would be called evidence, so that's why we allowed that, because we also support our law enforcement in this state. And that specific protection in our Constitution is what we're writing on with our new sanctuary law. And we've learned in the last 10 years that the nullification, the defiance type laws are not going to work. This is the kind of sanctuary law that it's interposition. It's not nullification. We are setting up a way for us to argue that because of our dual system, our system of states and federal governments, we have some sovereignty in this state. And we have the ability to say that a pre-existing fundamental right can be protected to a greater degree at our state level than what the federal government says they're going to protect. And the reason is because we have the Ninth Amendment and the 10th Amendment in the United States Constitution. So I'm going to read what those say, so we're all on the same page here. The 9th Amendment says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And the 10th Amendment recites that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. We're using the 10th Amendment as both a sword and a shield in this new law, because what we've done is we've said these firearms are a way of life for the people of Idaho. We need 30-round magazines. We need magazines of any size, 100-round magazines. We need ARs. We need pistols. We need plans for building guns. We need all of this stuff because that's what we value here. And these things are specifically protected by our Constitution, regardless of what the federal government says. And we as a state have the ability to provide greater protection to the people of the state of Idaho than what the federal government says we have. And this comes from both the 9th and the 10th Amendment argument, and it also comes from history and case law going back to before the Civil War, where the federal government passed something called the Fugitive Slave Act. If you don't know what that is, I can't go into it in great detail, but look it up and look up the case of Prigg versus Pennsylvania. So we have history, we have case law that goes beyond what was going on at Civil War times and also delves into the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment, which are also fundamental rights, that says that states can, in fact, protect these rights to a greater degree than the federal government. The right to keep and bear arms is a pre-existing fundamental right per Justice Scalia in the Heller case. And so we are making an analogy to the First and the Fourth Amendment and the case law that has played out in the United States Supreme Court with respect to those protections, and making the same argument on behalf of our right to keep and bear arms. The main difference between what's been done and what we're now proposing and have done in the state of Idaho, we're proposing to other states to give this a try, is this idea of interposition and placing these issues before the judiciary and arguing the limiting powers of the federal government versus the rights that are retained by the states. We retain the right to protect the right to keep and bear arms. We don't have to rely on the federal government to do that. So these are exciting times for us here in Idaho, and we feel that we have proposed something that may potentially be of interest to the United States Supreme Court if this actually gets litigated. And you know, the lawmaking process never gives us exactly what we're hoping for. Our first draft of this law was absolutely beautiful. It had everything we wanted in it. Through the sausage making process, we wound up with a bill that in a law now that wasn't quite as good. Things were left out that we certainly intend to pursue in the future, like requiring the Attorney General to challenge unconstitutional federal laws. They locked that one right out of there. But we have enough in the resulting law, the resulting sanctuary law that came out in Idaho in 2021, that we can make some really interesting arguments above and beyond these acts of defiance that are being passed in other locations. Stay vigilant, and we will certainly keep you updated on the AK show as things play out. As always, thank you for watching.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bryan Strawser, chairman of the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus and Political Action Committee, and it's great to talk to everyone today at the Gun Rights Policy Conference. Our mission at the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus is to be the trusted voice of Minnesota's gun owners to defend and restore the right to keep and bear arms. As I've outlined the last couple times I've spoken at GRPC, Minnesota has the nation's only divided legislature. In the Senate, it's controlled by Republicans. In the House, by Democrats, which we call the DFL. We have a Democratic governor and former Congressman Tim Walz. In last year's elections, the GOP held the Senate while the Democrats held the House, but with a much smaller majority than they did in 2019 and 2020. We were able to pull that off despite Michael Bloomberg and Gabby Giffords spending millions to elect anti-gun candidates here in Minnesota. In fact, we now have a pro-gun majority in the Minnesota House between the Republican minority and Democrats from Greater Minnesota. But control of the House rests squarely in the hands of the Metro anti-gun Democrats in the Minnesota House. Our governor, Tim Walz, well, he used to be an A-rated pro-gun congressman from rural Minnesota, but he betrayed all of that to run for statewide office, and he'll sign any anti-gun bill that is put in front of him right now. Our Democrats here in Minnesota, for the most part, they're progressives. They ran on gun control, magazine restrictions, background checks, bans on modern sporting rifles, licensing for gun owners, and more. In the Senate this legislative session that ended in June, the pro-gun GOP majority once again stood strong. They refused to take up any gun control legislation. Unfortunately, they also didn't advance any pro-gun rights legislation either. In the House, because there's technically a pro-gun majority, they didn't even have a single hearing on their gun control bills. Quite a change from the last 2 years, where they tried every single legislative trick in the book to get their 2 gun control bills, red flags and universal background checks, passed by the Minnesota House, where they then went over to the GOP-controlled Senate and died. Our legislature adjourned in June, won't be back until February 2022. We're going to see redistricting next year as a result of the census, and then next fall, in November 2022, every single legislative seat, the Senate and the House, will be up for re-election, along with our statewide constitutional offices like governor, attorney general, and more. We're also finding ourselves here in Minnesota having to turn more and more to the courts. This year alone, we've worked with the Second Amendment Foundation and the Firearms Policy Coalition to sue the state of Minnesota over their prohibition on 18 to 20-year-olds from obtaining permits to carry. And by the time you see this video, we will have filed a lawsuit in Ramsey County, Minnesota, against the Minnesota State Fair for their unlawful prohibition on the carry of firearms, an action that is clearly preempted by 2 different state statutes. And those are just 2 of several suits that we plan to pursue this year. I did want to highlight briefly some things that have worked well for us over the past several sessions that you might be able to take away from our experience here in Minnesota. The first is to have a full-time presence at the state capitol. Our political director and lobbyist was there every single day lobbying on behalf of our members, answering questions and helping legislators message gun rights and gun control legislation. We hold a lobby day every year. We've tried to make this the biggest event that we can. Our last lobby day, we had more than 800 people showed up. Makes a huge impression on both sides of the aisle because we vastly outnumber the lobby day held by the anti-gun groups. Make sure you send out press releases and get media attention as a part of that. Work to build allies in the news media. If you can get equal treatment and a quote on every story, you can ensure that your message doesn't get drowned out. Use video as much as you can. We have used Facebook Live more and more extensively to tell our story directly. In fact, almost every single day, we're broadcasting from the state capitol, giving an update, or from our offices here just north of the Twin Cities. We're launching a weekly show hosted by our political director that will help get folks more active across the state as we head into the 2022 elections. Make sure you're surveying and grading candidates and publish your endorsements. Back your champions that move your legislation with time, energy, and money to show them off, but also to show others that you will support and have the back of those who will go to the wall for you and our cause. Our organization continues to grow here in Minnesota with thousands of members and hundreds of new monthly donors. And we look forward to electing a pro-gun majority in 2022 and passing key Second Amendment legislation like constitutional carry and stand your ground into law. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the Gun Rights Policy Conference, and I hope to see all of you in person in 2022.
Good morning. This is Richard Pearson, Executive Director of the Illinois State Rifle Association. I'm glad to give you the Illinois report this morning. Illinois is always busy. We have several court cases going on. One of those cases is Brown versus the state of Illinois. And in this particular case, a disabled lady by the name of Vivian Brown was threatened by her ex-husband and acquired a .22 rifle for her personal protection, single-shot rifle. In Illinois, to own a firearm, you have to have a firearm owner's identification card. You have to have that to buy firearms, to have ammunition. Ms. Brown did not have one, and so someone called the police, and they came and arrested Ms. Brown, seized her .22 rifle, and arrested her. The public defender in White County argued constitutionally that the FOID card was unconstitutional in the home, and he won the case. And so the White County judge agreed with him that the FOID card is unconstitutional in the home, and that is now on the way to the Illinois Supreme Court. Ms. Brown is not financially able to handle this case, so the Illinois State Rifle Association is stepping in with attorneys and fees to pay her court costs. Should we prevail in this, it will deal a blow to the FOID card. It will be probably the beginning of the end of the FOID card. In the meantime, though, while we want to get rid of the FOID card in the long term, we still have the FOID card law as the law of the land in the short term. So we are very concerned about getting our people who have FOID cards, get those renewed on time. In Illinois, because of the pandemic, about half of the state police staff was sent home to process FOID cards, and so we're probably 400,000 or 500,000 FOID cards behind. So the governor has just signed HB 562, the FOID Card Modernization Act, and what this act does is several things. Just to let you know, a FOID card is a 10-year card, costs you $10 for 10 years. The problem, of course, is getting it renewed. So in this case, if you buy a firearm from a federal firearms dealer, your FOID card will automatically be renewed from 10 years from the date of that purchase. So there won't be any paperwork that you'll have to do. You'll be able to, it will just be renewed. If you, the new FOID cards also don't have an expiration date. The old ones did, so if something would happen and they go by the date, while the state recognizes that it's their problem, people who buy ammunition and other things online may have that problem. So not having an expiration date on the FOID card will be important. If you have a concealed carry permit, and you've given your fingerprints, or you have fingerprints on file with the state of Illinois for some other reason, if you give the state permission to use those fingerprints, your FOID card becomes a lifetime FOID card. So in my case, I've got 3 sets of fingerprints down there, and so I will have a lifetime FOID card, and I won't ever have to pay for another FOID card, and I don't have to worry about it. The other problem has been changing addresses on FOID cards. It's been an eternal problem since the FOID card began, and now when you change your address on your driver's license, the state police will automatically know that you've changed your address, so your FOID card will be updated. And there will be no charge for that either. In the past, they've charged anywhere from $6 to $80 to change the address on a FOID card, so all those charges will go away. The other problem is that people move a lot, and so when they get their renewal notice for their FOID card, if they've not purchased a firearm, they'll get one. It can come text, email, or snail mail, U.S. mail. You can get it any way you want it to. And so since most people live by their cell phone today, they'll be notified by text from the Illinois State Police. You can also get an electronic FOID card under this new law. So I can carry my FOID card on my cell phone if I want to, or my iPad or whatever. So this will make it a lot more convenient for those who have a FOID card. And the law requires Illinois dealers to honor that, ammunition sellers to honor that electronic version. So there will be no increase in the fees of FOID cards. In the past, there have been anti-gun attempts to increase the fee on a FOID card for as high as $500 for 10 years. This puts into law that it will be $10 for 10 years, once again, unless, of course, you do one of the things that automatically renews your FOID card. So that's the good parts about the FOID card. The bad part about the FOID card is that fees have been shifted from the Department of Natural Resources to the Illinois State Police. Before, the Illinois State Police got $4 per FOID card, and the Department of Natural Resources got $6. Now, the state police will get all of that money, and the Department of Natural Resources will be funded in another way, which is also already arranged for. The bad part about this new legislation is that you now have to go to a NICS check, but it's not a. It doesn't work quite the way some places do it. You simply check if the person is eligible eligible to buy a firearm. If they are, that paperwork then does not go to the federal government, but it goes to a firearm dealer who will charge you $25 to keep that paperwork for 20 years, which is what the law requires. So it's not quite an national instant background check. It's just a background check using the NICS system, but the paperwork goes to a local dealer. So while we don't like that provision, we still had several 100,000 people not getting their FOID cards. So we were neutral on the bill, but starting the 1st of January, most of this provisions will go into effect. And 2024, the firearm transfer provision will go into effect. And so we'll have a lot of time to work on it between now and then. So I want to thank you for watching, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alex Roubian with the New Jersey Second Amendment Society. What I'd like to talk to you about today is about how we fight in states like New Jersey behind enemy lines and how that information can be used to win and fight battles in your state. Obviously, you can see what happens in New Jersey does not stay in New Jersey. The fights and the issues that we have going on here has now spread nationally, and it's not only a Second Amendment issue, it's also been a First Amendment issue. It's no surprise that people that support the Second Amendment, conservatives, predominantly Republicans, are being targeted, are being silenced, are being kicked off social media platforms. And I'll tell you exactly what happened to me when I was approaching our governor to talk about issues of the Second Amendment when he decided to shut down gun ranges and gun stores under the guise of public safety during COVID. Obviously, we have a tremendous amount of issues in our state. We have a lot of laws that prohibit the types of guns you can buy, where you can have those guns, how you can get to and from the gun range, and so forth, magazine capacity limitations. It goes on and on. As you know firsthand, people that are watching nationally, they are finding out the hard way that what happens in this state does not stay in this state. And that's why it's important you support organizations like ours to help fight these issues behind enemy lines so that it doesn't spread nationally or into your state. About a year ago, when COVID hit, we were approaching the governor at the press conferences with our press credentials, asking him questions about why the gun ranges are being shut down. After one or two of those sessions, he decided he no longer liked the questions I asked and decided to kick us out and not allow us to have any access to the public press conferences while all other reporters were asking the same questions we were asking or something of the same nature. Obviously, this is a massive violation of our First Amendment right, and we decided to take it to court. And ultimately, we ended up prevailing when the when the Attorney General's office approached us and said they want to be able to settle this case outside of court. And due to our great legal team and our actions, we were able to settle out of court for $65,000 for violating our First Amendment right. That was a major victory, not only for First Amendment rights, but also for the Second Amendment rights. Because we have the right to be asking these questions. We have the right to ask the government officials about why they are infringing on our Second Amendment rights. This holds to many other issues. You see what's going on in society today. You see what's happening throughout the media. People that support the Second Amendment, people that support gun rights, and certain groups like Republicans, like conservatives, are being shut down. They're being deplatformed. They're being blacklisted by social media platforms because they do not want our voices to be heard. That's why it's very important that we stay together, we stay focused, and we make sure our side is being heard about the benefits and why the Second Amendment exists, because without our voices, they will win and they will be able to take away our rights because the opposition will have the leading voice. The opposition will give their sides about how you're safer without a gun, et cetera, where they make up their own facts and manipulate the information and create their own narrative, which obviously, if you turn on any news station, you can see over and over and over again how they keep pushing this false narrative that guns are bad, guns are bad, guns are bad. That's how they indoctrinate people. That's how they brainwash society. That's how they brainwash people into thinking that guns are bad and there's no benefit to it. There's plenty of studies proving that every year, millions of people every year use guns for self-defense, to prevent sexual assault, to prevent murder, to protect their property, and so forth. But you'll never hear that from the mainstream media because they're controlling the narrative. They're working together with the Bloomberg groups so that they could force a specific narrative out there to the public. And I found out firsthand when our Governor Phil Murphy, kicked me out of his press conferences so that we could not ask these questions. They couldn't stand the fact that we were there, that we were asking very valid questions about people's constitutional rights, and that message was getting out through our social media platforms, and people were responding to it. So I would like everybody to understand that we have to stay focused. This is not just a Second Amendment fight. This is also a First Amendment fight. If you look throughout history, why did it have big book burnings? Because the tyrants, the people that didn't want, the dictators and tyrants and people in charge didn't want any different views. And ultimately, those views were always siding with freedom and liberties that the oppressive governments did not want the people to find out about. So let's all work together on this. We have major uphill battles coming ahead that we need to stick together on. We need to fight in unity. Obviously, most of you probably already know, the United States Supreme Court has taken up a major case about having to show a need to carry a firearm in public. And obviously, that's going to be a major victory if the United States Supreme Court sides with us. But these are the laws that we live under in states like New Jersey, where we have to prove our life is valuable enough to be able to be protected. Where I know firsthand, that the judges, the politicians that are taking our guns away, they all carry guns for protecting themselves because their lives are obviously more valuable. But when it comes to average citizens, we never had the opportunity to be able to get a permit, which we shouldn't even need to begin with, to be able to carry a firearm for self-defense. So if you want to find out more, please visit nj2as.org to see what we're up to in states like New Jersey behind enemy lines, how we're fighting, and we're fighting back and winning.
The Connecticut Citizens Defense League is proud of another eventful year fighting for Second Amendment rights in a deeply anti-gun state. As gun ownership surges across America, our small state has been no exception to this national trend. Recent news reports show that permit issuance doubled in 2020 from numbers from 2019. CCDL continues to expand our influence and grew from 27,000 members to 40,000 members in the past year and a half. We're proud to be the representative organization for law-abiding gun owners in our state, both new and old.
Liberty, once lost, is lost forever. It's Election Day. Today, you help decide the course of your freedom. Vote for candidates who truly support your rights. Vote for the Second Amendment.
In Newtown, Connecticut, a national gun control group attempted to pass 3 local ordinances under the pretense of protecting Newtown citizens. This national organization wanted a ban on openly carrying firearms in the whole town, a ban of all firearms on town property, and wanted firearms banned at all public demonstrations.
So my name is Poe Murray. I've lived in Newtown for over 21 years with my husband and 4 of my children. And I have been leading the Newtown Action Alliance since my neighbor killed 26 children and educators at Sandy Hook 8 years ago.
The proponents of this even went as far as to call Connecticut gun owners white supremacists in an attempt to push their agenda.
In 2020, with white extremism and armed intimidation spreading like wildfire across the nation, it's time for Newtown Legislative Council to take preemptive action before another gun violence tragedy occurs in Newtown.
CCDL's outreach team was quickly activated, and these proposals were deferred or voted down one by one. During the series of public hearings, while the anti-gun advocates spewed lies, CCDL members stayed level-headed and remained calm to prevail and show Newtown that gun owners were not the extremists that they were being portrayed as. CCDL faced similar battles in other towns and cities throughout Connecticut, and CCDL was there every time. I'm happy to report that the Second Amendment has remained victorious throughout.
I am a physician. I'm a father of 3. I'm a husband. And I do have some concerns about the showing of your permit issue that you are proposing. You know, one of the most common scenarios I can envision would be if I'm in Dunkin' Donuts and somebody does spot a bulge on me or through my sport coat, that member of the public may decide to call 911. That, to me, would not be a reason for a member of the public to call the police, and therefore that would not be a reason for the police to have any reason to ask for my permit. I am a permitted holder. I will carry a firearm wherever I'm allowed by law. Why would I, as a legal gun owner, not doing anything, not acting in any strange way, not acting in a threatening way, have to then have a contact with a law enforcement officer and produce my permit when there's no reasonable suspicion? So I do have a lot of concerns about this proposed ordinance.
Gun crimes are happening in these communities, in the urban areas where it is highly concentrated with Black and Hispanic. So the solution that this resolution is introducing to the legislature is to ask the government to force people, to force the police officers to go into these communities and target the same people that are trying to exercise their Second Amendment rights. The way this is written, it's saying it's okay to racially profile Latinos and Blacks in these communities. That's the way I read this, the text in this. So I would ask that you guys not introduce this resolution, do not pass this, do not encourage any lawmakers in the state of Connecticut to target Black and Latinos. And if you're not aware, the fastest growing demographic when it comes to gun ownership now in the United States and also in the state of Connecticut.
For the first time in recent history, Connecticut permit holders regained a right lost. We got a law passed that allows Connecticut residents to now carry tasers and stun guns outside of their homes for self-protection. We are tremendously proud of this restored right and thank the members and legislators who made it happen unanimously across party lines. Back in 2019, Connecticut passed a firearm storage law called Ethan's Law that requires all firearms to be locked up, whether loaded or unloaded. This law is now being pushed on the national level. CCDL was strongly opposed to this law from the beginning. However, CCDL advocated and got an addition made to this law that the state shall develop a firearm safety curriculum for schools that local school boards can adopt to teach firearm safety in grades K through 12. With our advocacy, we were able to have our first school system adopt this program, and we have many other towns that will soon be following in this true safety measure.
The Firearm Safety Guide for Connecticut Schools is in response to the passing of Public Act 19-5, known as Ethan's Law, in 2019. A section of the Public Act required the State Board of Education to approve guidance for schools to develop appropriate firearm safety curriculum, educating students from elementary, middle, and high school. Contact your town, city, or regional Board of Education to encourage them to incorporate this approved safety guide in your local school district.
Currently, CCDL is in the middle of a fight with the state over a complete shutdown of firearms transfers. Back in July, the state attempted to upgrade their background check system, which has additional checks beyond just federal NICS. This was supposed to be done over just a few days, and we were promised that this new multi-million-dollar system would be a much-needed improvement to make the system faster and more efficient. But the system was launched with tremendous technical and logistical glitches. This caused gun stores to spend countless hours a day on the phone trying to get a background check authorization number to sell just one firearm.
You have reached the authorization line during normal business hours. All representatives are currently assisting other callers. Please try back at a later time.
To date, some FFLs have had sales virtually completely depleted due to the inability to reach the state in order to get an authorization number. Additionally, the state simultaneously rolled out a new fingerprint system for permits. Police departments were not trained in advance or are unable to log into the new system, causing pistol permit applicants that need their prints taken in order to get a permit to be turned away. Residents are lining up at the state police barracks at 4 a.m. in an attempt to try to get their application processed. Most residents are being turned away once quotas are hit for the day. On July 20th, 2021, the CCDL filed an emergency motion with the court seeking to stop the state's most recent and egregious constitutional violations. We are continuing to fight this absolute failure to provide for a reasonable process to be able to keep and bear arms. CCDL is committed to this fight, and we look forward to a victorious report on this time next year.
Hi all, I'm Dianna Muller, coming to you from my dad's man cave in north central Missouri. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a retired police officer, I'm a professional 3-gun competitor, and I'm the founder of the DC Project, Women for Gun Rights, and the Ambassador Academy. The vast majority of my life, if you had asked me, who is the gun lobby, I would have said the NRA. For years, I would give them my annual dues and not think another thing about it. I was unaware of any of the other Second Amendment organizations or the work they did to defend the Second Amendment. I wasn't plugged in. I wasn't engaged. And with only 6% of gun owners participating in any kind of Second Amendment organization, I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of gun owners that aren't plugged in. A handful of years ago, all of this changed for me. I found myself sitting in front of my congressman and as a tourist, and the light bulb came on. I said, hey, is there something that we as pro shooters should be doing to help educate the folks in this building that are making some pretty horrendous decisions that affect us all? That was the moment my Second Amendment advocacy began. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the moment I became the gun lobby. That is the moment that sparked me to pay attention and start engaging, getting plugged in. I was woefully behind and I felt a sense of urgency, but I had reached a point and I realized nobody is coming to save us. It is up to us. It is up to me. But how does somebody make a difference? Is it even possible to meet with your legislators? Would it be effective? The wheels start turning. And in the words of Cheryl Todd, if not me, then who? The wheels are turning, and I realize that women have a stronger voice when speaking on the Second Amendment since we break that stereotype of the typical gun owner. So I started reaching out to women in the industry. I only have standing in my home state, so I'm going to need one woman from every state, which was the initial goal. And that's where the DC Project was born. Fast forward to 2020, and we've asked those women to go back to their home states and execute the same effort at the state level. The DC Project has had some amazing accomplishments over the past several years. Every year we have a rally. Now, I'm not a rally girl, so this makes me extremely uncomfortable. But there's something powerful. There's something so cool about being on the lawn of the Capitol of the United States of America and being free to speak our minds. I would highly encourage you to attend a rally because, you got it, you are the gun lobby. Now, if you were at the 2019 Gun Rights Policy Conference, you know that I testified in front of the House Judiciary against an assault weapons ban. We knew that Moms Demand would be there in their signature red shirts. The DC Project came up with the Teal for 2A campaign. 10 ladies accompanied me to the hearing, dressed in our teal Educate, Not Legislate t-shirts, and sat right behind me. And it worked perfectly. Anytime the cameras were on me, you could see a sea of teal behind me. And if you've been keeping up with the Chipman nomination for ATF, he was sitting right next to me that day. So there's a good chance that you've seen some teal in his pictures as well. And that pink dress that was loaned to me by none other than the magnificent Julianne Versnell right after I got off stage at the 2019 conference. As far as Moms Demand goes, the DC Project has organically become the counter visual and the counter voice to the red-shirted commie mommies. They are not experts in guns, nor are they experts in violence, and they do not speak for us. The DC Project was also honored to play an instrumental part in the testimony and the optics game during Chris Chang's appearance in the Senate Judiciary this spring. We helped craft his testimony and made a statement in the room by coordinating not one, but two pro-Second Amendment minorities sitting right behind him. That's the reality of who the gun lobby really is. There's a misconception that the gun lobby is only made up of white dudes, and Moms Demand makes it seem like all women are against firearms. But take a look at this.
The belief has been for a really long time that if you are not 6'2" with a beard and a plaid shirt, that you don't care about guns and you don't care about the Second Amendment. And what we found was that, guess what? We do.
So how do we influence? Legislators will tell you that it's exponentially more influential to get a visit from a constituent than it is from a lobbyist. That's why the DC Project continues to go to Capitol Hill and continues to forge relationships with our members and their staff. Our most recent trip this past spring, we took a small contingent due to the restrictions and had the honor of presenting to the GOP members of the Second Amendment Caucus and to the Senate Judiciary staff. Each of our girls told their story, which really provides armor for the pro-Second Amendment legislators to defend against the attacks from groups like Moms Demand. Here's what Congressman Massey said about our visit.
There's some members who are here who they're pro-Second Amendment, but they don't really know how to articulate or how to motivate our argument for the Second Amendment. But these ladies actually gave us a voice today. And I know we're going to be able to make better arguments in our hearings on the floor, in debates, and I know we're going to be able to hold the line because DC Project came here tonight.
Since that trip in April, 3 of our DC Project ladies have testified in a series of gun control hearings. Nikki Gosier testified in the Senate Judiciary against red flag laws. Ashley Lubinsky testified on ghost guns. And I testified in the House Judiciary on steps to prevent gun violence, where they were pushing background checks on ammunition, safe storage laws, and repealing the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. Their attacks on the Second Amendment will never stop. And it's up to all of us to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. And do this with gentleness and respect. That's 1 Peter 3:15. Effectively influencing our friends, our families, and our communities should be an intentional goal, but that can be difficult in today's climate. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here because Gun Rights Policy Conference is the most effective event I've seen that actually helps attendees equip themselves with knowledge and the talking points. But I feel like as a whole, this is an area that our side can improve upon. Knowing what to say about why you oppose universal background checks, knowing why you oppose red flag laws, that you believe education is the key to safety and not legislation. Knowing those things are critical. Training yourselves to articulate how gun-free zones kill and learn the stories like Nikki Gosier, who witnessed her husband being killed by her stalker in a gun-free zone while her lawfully permitted gun remained in the car. She was legislated out of protecting herself and left defenseless. That you are your own first responder, and backing that up by telling Melissa Schuster's story about getting stabbed 17 times, beaten in the face with a crock pot, and raped and left for dead in a stranger home invasion. She will tell you that the rape was the worst of it all. That gun rights are women's rights. Firearms are the great equalizers. Amanda Johnson was a martial arts trained concealed carry holder that played by the gun-free zone rules and left her gun at home while she went to class at a Nevada university. 100 yards away from the police station, an evil soul violently raped her at gunpoint. He went on to rape and kill his next victim. Amanda knows if she had been armed that night, she could have changed the trajectory of both of their lives. Tragic stories are not owned by the anti-gun side. We can use emotion as well to talk about why we never want to be defenseless, why we choose to carry, and why we support the Second Amendment. And let's talk about common sense and evidence. Let's use their words and shove them back down their throats. Common sense is seeing decades of evidence that gun control laws do not equal safety. Over the past 30 years, many American cities like Chicago, Baltimore, and St. Louis have all adopted extremely strict gun control laws, and they are leading the way in violence and crime. When citizens cannot defend themselves, criminals are emboldened, crime soars, and communities are less safe. Common sense is that cities that are plagued with violence should adopt the laws of the cities that aren't plagued with violence. Common sense is holding criminals accountable for breaking the law that are already on the books instead of releasing them from jail or encouraging them to be more confrontational like Maxine Waters did. Common sense is that guns and walls do work, which is why the Capitol was surrounded by both for months. During my last testimony, I told them that the hypocrisy did not go unnoticed. Where does one get to practice how to articulate these talking points? Whether to be a friendly podcast or a hostile interview. Where do you go to train to be better on camera? Where do you learn how to utilize and strategize social media and understand the analytics? How do I film and edit my own content? These are some of the questions that led me to start the Ambassador Academy. It's an intensive 5-day academy that brings subject matter experts under one roof to teach on a myriad of topics that makes you a better ambassador, not only for your partners, but for the larger picture, the Second Amendment community. Each and every gun owner, each and every employee of a firearms company would benefit from this class. Our goal is to plant the seeds that will grow into more Dana Lashes, more Coleon Noirs, more Maj Tourés. Get the details at ambassadoracademy.info. Listen, we are in a messaging and information war. It's more important than ever to know how to articulate our position and positively influence your audience. Whether that be the janitor at the next conference you attend, or the person sitting next to you on the airplane, or even your legislators. If you would like some help with messaging, check out the landing page of the dcproject.info. There is a free one-page document that talks about effective communication. The silent majority can no longer afford to be silent. We have to start playing offense. In closing, here is my ask. Embrace your inner lobbyist. Get engaged. If you don't already know the names of both of your senators and your representative, look them up. Same with your state legislators. Same with your local government officials. Same with your school board. Save their phone numbers in your phone and call them often. You don't have to travel to Washington, D.C. to meet federal legislators. They have offices in their home states. Grab a friend and set up a meeting. Ladies, we would love for you to plug into the DC Project at your state level. And more importantly than you knowing them, make sure they know you. Why? Because you are the gun lobby. Have a great conference.
Hi, I'm Rieck Patterson, Senior Vice President of Corporate Development for the Second Amendment Foundation and Principal Partner in Liberty's Keystone. I'm going to talk today about the United Nations and their gun control efforts and how those have evolved or devolved as may be more appropriate. And I'm also going to leave you at the end with a way to really get under the skin of the left. The UN's interest in gun control really started with military equipment in the late 1980s. Prior to that, the US and USSR kept a very tight control over the movement of military equipment around the world. They would fight these proxy wars in countries all over, but they never wanted the wars to escalate enough that it would draw in the US and USSR themselves. So they kept very tight control. But when the Soviet Union fell, those controls ended. More significantly, there were very large stockpiles of military equipment that were kept all over the world. Russia, the Eastern Bloc countries, other countries that were friendly to the former Soviet regime. And suddenly the military officers, the government officials in the territories that held the keys to those stockpiles were out of work. And they realized that they had a fortune sitting in these warehouses. And they started selling all of that equipment to the highest bidders. And it completely changed the landscape for the distribution of military weaponry around the world. And that really got the UN first involvement in this arena. In 1996, they created the Wassenaar Arrangement, which was simply designed to provide some transparency, some sort of oversight, some sort of reporting of some sort to know, where this equipment was going and to whom. And that was really primarily focused on the large equipment, ships, planes, artillery, tanks. But they also threw in a provision for light weapons, and that ended up morphing into small arms and light weapons. Then you started with the 2001 Program of Action to Prevent, Combat, and Eradicate the Illicit Trade of Small Arms and Light Weapons in all its aspects. And this was designed to focus specifically on the small arms, light weapons issue. Of course, it originally started as a military focus, but very quickly, the only real discussion that happened was on civilian firearms. The program of action, as it was called, became the launching point for all of the gun control initiatives that were the focus of UN efforts. There was also the Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime going on, and that was based out of the Vienna office of the UN. That focused primarily on drugs and human trafficking, money laundering by organized crime, but they added a firearms component as well. The US is not a party to that treaty, but our neighbors and the EU, 120 other nations are. Throughout the evolution of these various instruments and reports and meetings that happen, we've seen a progression of escalation of gun control efforts and focus. For instance, in the program of action, ammunition was specifically kept out. Now, as the subsequent, they call them biennial meeting of states, they happen every 2 years. It's update reports on the program of action. And they started trying to get ammunition into that discussion. And they talk more and more about making tracing efficient, quote unquote, which sounds wonderful. But how does that actually happen? It's thinly veiled attempt to implement full registration and licensing of personally owned firearms and ammunition. So you see this, we're not going to mention it, becoming a mention, and they'll use terminologies like within the scope of national laws, which makes everybody happy, sounds good. But now they've gone so far. In the last biennial meeting of states, which just concluded in July, they went so far as to even eliminate that when talking about making tracing of firearms more efficient. And so now you've got this international program that used to say, hey, listen, it's within the purview of national law to determine how this is done. And they're even eliminating that and saying, okay, this has to be done. And the problems that come from that are many. The problem that we have in combating all this is we have to focus not only on every word of every phrase in every report, but we also have to look at how those words, those phrases, can be twisted and expanded 3, 4, 5, 6 steps down the road. So that's the challenge that we have in addressing all of this. And you see this constant creep. The other thing that's troubling in all of this is everything had worked under consensus. Everybody has to agree on these ideas and before it will be put into an actual report or treaty. The benefit of consensus is when everybody agrees that this is what should be done, they actually do it. But with the arms trade treaty, they broke the policy of consensus and they passed that with a majority vote. And so now you have a precedent where on gun control issues, the United Nations makes its decisions based on a majority rule, not on consensus. And that's a very, very dangerous precedent to give the majority, which if you look at the 193 countries around the world, the tin pot dictators can combine and dictate what's happening, within the international arena. And that's just wrong. But that's yet another challenge. I think the third big challenge that we face in the United Nations right now is there's an effort to combine all of these different international gun control treaties into one large gun control concept regime. You've got the Program of Action, you've got the Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, the International Tracing Instrument, the Arms Trade Treaty. You have Mosaic, the Modular Small Arms Control Implementation Compendium, which is a renamed, repackaged ISACs, International Small Arms Control Standards. With the ISACs, they attempted to create the illusion of these are the international standards on how to handle gun control. It addressed 33 different aspects. There's 33 books, 800 and some odd pages in total on every aspect of gun control. And they tried to make it sound like this followed a standard setting practice. Hey, I'm very familiar with standard setting practices. I lived it for many, many years. I was very involved with American National Standards Institute, which is the U.S. representative to ISO, the International Standardization Organization. I know how standards work. I know how standards are developed. And there wasn't anything resembling a legitimate standard setting development process in the creation of these ISACs, or now they call Mosaic. What they did was hire the gun control advocates to write each module and, push those through, made it sound like they were doing, all the right stuff for standards, but they never changed their issues, even when it was pointed out that they were factually incorrect. And they ended up essentially with 33 opinion papers. You also have, as I mentioned, ITI was carefully negotiated by the countries to limit the scope of marking and tracing to firearms. The ammunition was outside the scope of this. But the Arms Trade Treaty mentions ammunition only in the context of, well, you should keep records. Well, when you start combining those various instruments into one large regime, you can pick and choose and start putting requirements that were taken out of context. So, okay, you've got ammunition in the ATT, and you've got marking and tracing in ITI. Combine those, hey, you've got to have marking and tracing of ammunition, which is one of their goals. Incorporate into that the Mosaic, which they're starting to reference in the reports, both on the international and regional levels, bring in the Mosaic and say, hey, these are the standards. We have to incorporate this into this massive gun control regime. And the problems are exponential, and it is the gun control wish list and implementation of that wish list. So that's what we're dealing with at the United Nations. The question becomes, what can you do as an individual? The United Nations is about diplomats and countries. There really isn't a place for individuals to participate in that process. I love the UN. They talk about transparency, and yes, we have to be transparent, and we'll talk about it behind closed doors, but that's the UN. As an individual, the most important thing you can do, of course, is vote. The administration in charge at the time that these reports are being written has a great deal of influence over the employees at the Department of State and what they will accept in the reports and what they will keep out. So, getting involved in the elections is critically important. And the other thing is to realize gun control is really just part of a larger attempt to create socialism. And the other thing is to look at the larger picture and combat socialism where you can. I think it's important to look at how socialist regimes have taken control throughout the world, starting with the National Socialist German Workers' Party taking over Germany in the 1930s, following a simple model. It was the same model followed by the United Soviet Socialist Republic following World War II. What did they do? They took over the media. They took over education. They took over law enforcement. Once they had those under control, they also took over things like healthcare. And in the case of the Soviet Union, following World War II, food distribution. If you didn't follow the party line, then you would not have access to certain fundamental needs. Get involved. Get involved with your school boards. I think one of the great things to come out of the pandemic, if that's the right way to put it, is that parents started seeing what their kids were being taught, what teachers were instilling in their kids, and they were outraged, and they should have been. And so get involved with the school boards. Make sure that they are pushing curricula and agendas and not tolerating anyone who is doing anything but promoting liberty, freedom, democracy in the schools. In the case of law enforcement, if there's a civilian committee in your town, get involved. I think it's fascinating. One of the elements of socialist takeover is control the law enforcement. They haven't been able to do that in the U.S. Sure, the big city mayors appoint police chiefs in the large cities who will push that agenda, but the rank and file police officer is a staunch supporter of liberty and the Second Amendment. And so they can't control them. So what are we seeing them try to do today? They're trying to destroy them. And get involved with the citizens committees. Don't allow them to defund police. And in the case of media, sure, buy a network, but a whole lot cheaper and just as effective is don't listen. Turn it off. If nobody's listening, they have no influence. So, and now I'm going to leave you with that thought of how do you really get under the skin of a liberal? And it's really simple. Have fun. Have a great time. Head out to the range with friends, family, go golfing, go fishing, hiking. It really doesn't matter. Have a good time. Enjoy life, and I'll see you at next year's Gun Rights Policy Conference.